Getting my partner up here, Bonnie. Good morning, I'm Olivia Fuentes and I'm from the Los Angeles County Office of Education. And we're back again, and we know we're right before lunch, but we're going to make it as engaging as possible. We know that the annual update, for the most part, didn't change. There were some key changes, as you recall, with the analysis section. So we're going to look at, am I good? Okay. We're going to look at some samples of annual updates that we would approve or disapprove. So as you recall, if you weren't here in a previous training section, we talked about the simple part. The districts need to carry over verbatim the wording for their goals. So it's important that you ensure that all of the wording is correct. And we do at LA County have a process for that. We have certain staff just assigned to do that. So it helps our reviewers. So, because it's pretty comprehensive. So as you can see, for the goals, I don't know who's playing with oh, here, let me have that. Okay. I don't know who's doing the slides. Okay. So as you can read in the instructions, must be copied verbatim. And the selected state priorities must be the same. Pretty simple. And as you will read in the approval manual, it talks about, again, the same wording is used as in the original LCAP, and you have to verify the priorities are the same that were addressed in the LCAP that was approved in the prior year. So for the next section, the outcomes. And this is an interesting section because sometimes our districts are very zealous and they want to report on what they did. So sometimes they change the wording. But again, under the expected outcome, you must verify that the wording is the same as the prior year's LCAP. In the actual, that's where they can talk about what in fact did they achieve. So that's where they will say, okay, instead of a suspension rate of 5%, we didn't meet that, we increased our suspension rate. So in the actual column, that's where they would report on the progress for that outcome. Next are the actual review notes. So as I've stated, you will copy exactly the same outcome as you approved, and in the actual, you have to verify that all of the information is understandable. So as you've seen some of the LCAPs throughout the state, sometimes you read it in terms of what they are reporting, and you think, what does that mean? So think about the community that you serve and think about, is it understandable to every stakeholder within that community? And you can see the references to the CCESA approval manual there. And here's an example that we'd like you to read. And we're going to ask you to determine, would you approve this report? So look at the expected column where it says, and I know that you don't have a handout for that, but we hope that you can read it from either the PowerPoint slide there or on the handout that you have. So look at what was reported. They decreased suspensions for all students by 0.5% to 5.4%. And in the actual, they said suspension rates for all students, 4.9%. The next expected outcome was maintain number of expulsions below 15, and their actual expulsions were 4. Lastly, they reported increased attendance rate by 0.9% to 97%. Cumulative attendance rate, 96.1%. So let's look at whether we would approve it or not. Is each outcome from the prior year's LCAP identified? Yes, it is. Is each outcome reviewed as compared to the prior year? Shaking of the head? Yes. Lastly, is the information understandable? I can see everyone shaking. Yes, it is. It's understandable in the format that, in the format. Okay, and the next example. Here in this example, it says decrease suspensions for all students by 0.5. The actual suspension rates for all students, 4.9. Maintain number of expulsions below 15. Schools are making significant improvement in decreasing number of expulsions. Lastly, increase attendance rate by 0.9 to 97%. Data not available. So discuss at your tables. Would you approve or disapprove? Lots of conversation. So let's look, because we've all seen LCAP's report their information like this, correct? So let's look. Oops, the X is already showing. Gave you a hint there. Is each outcome from the prior year's outcome identified? Yes? Okay. Is each outcome reviewed as compared to the prior year? No. And lastly, is the information understandable? It wasn't, right? And we saw in that first example that suspension rates for all students, 4.9, it didn't tell you anything, right? And it didn't tell you anything in the second actual report. It just said significant improvement. Doesn't tell you if they kept it below 15 or not. And then the last one, I know that we've seen this, data not yet available. Okay? Now, the next section will ask the districts to report on their actions and services and what actually happened. So we know that on the left side of the boxes, right, the actual, they're going to copy what they had in their LCAP from the previous year, what was approved. And in the second box, the actual, what actually happened with that action and service. So let's take a look at some samples. So take a minute and read the planned and the actual, and then we'll decide if it's approvable or not approvable. They had planned to provide online assessments, to monitor students' academic progress and develop reports that combine their SIS and academic data to track the school's progress. In the actual column, they describe what the district did. So let's take a look. Our planned actions and services from prior years, LCAP included verbatim. We're assuming they are. Check mark. Our actual actions and services as implemented described in the appropriate box, including changes to student groups or planned locations. They did that, correct? And lastly, is each section completed and all information understandable? Would all of your stakeholders understand that? I see the shaking of the heads. Let's check that. Check mark. Good job. That is approvable. Let's look at another sample. And we've had these in our county. Okay, you can see, hey, we've had them all. We have 80 districts, so we have a sample of every single type of LCAP. Okay, so planned, read the plan, what was planned, and then what actually happened. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes to read that. Okay, discuss at your tables. What's your general impression? Is it approvable or not? Okay. Let's go ahead and decide if it's approvable or not. And I think there's some easy clues, right? Okay, in the planned action, do you think they copied it verbatim? No, we could tell, right? Because it indicated it was decided mid-year. So we noticed that there was a change and they didn't copy the planned action verbatim. Are actual actions and services as implemented described in the appropriate box, including changes to student groups or planned locations? Yes or no? No. Implemented as planned. Well, they didn't really implement it as planned, right? If they made mid-year corrections or changed their action and services. So they didn't describe what actually happened. So let's see, I think that's pretty easy. And then, was each section completed and all information understandable? No, right? So we know that we have seen some of our districts just put implemented throughout their LCAPs, and I'm looking at our LCAP team that review all of these LCAPs. So no, this would not be approvable. Okay, and the checking of the wording, that can be done through, beginning now, as most of I know we have a template, an online template that many of our districts use, and our districts are anxiously awaiting for it to roll over. And we know CDE's electronic template actually rolls it over as well, so that whole process is simplified when our districts choose to use either our template or CDE's template. So that you can start verifying a lot of that information now. Okay, now let's look at expenditures. What was budgeted, and we get a lot of questions about budgeted and what was the estimated actual. So again, left-hand side, copied from the prior year's LCAP, and the estimated actuals would include funds expected to be encumbered through June 30th of the current year. So in the review notes again, we verify that they're the same on the left-hand column, and then verify that the estimated actual expenditures are included. And it should be reported in an understandable format. So let's take a couple of minutes to look at a couple of examples. Okay, as you can see, in the planned, we included the planned and actual actions and services, so you could look at the budgeted and estimated actual expenditures. So take a few minutes to review, to look if they're reported appropriately, and are the expenditures also reported correctly. Okay, take a couple of minutes to look at that. Okay, let's look to see if we would approve this or not. Okay, let's review. Do the budgeted expenditures reflect the budgeted expenditures in the prior year's LCAP? For those of you who have reviewed this section, it's pretty detailed, and we know that it's quite comprehensive. So let me make sure the batteries are still there. Okay. Somehow it's not. Okay. Okay, so we're not moving forward. Okay, so we know in this section that yes, we would look at the 3 criteria as posted on the slide there. No, we were, that one, so let's go to that. We have a slow internet, and for those of you who haven't been able to connect to the internet, we know it's a little slow. We know in this sample they did a good job of reporting, right, what they actually expended. So a little computer glitch. Okay. So let's take a look at the next sample. And in this sample, it talks about the teachers, the planned action talked about 5 teachers were hired and 2 APs were added to what was originally budgeted to support English learners in middle schools. A bungalow was added to the original budget to provide space for services. So that's what they reported in the planned actual, in the planned action and service. And what was actually reported said action was implemented as planned. And if you look at what was budgeted, they indicated certificated salaries, employee benefits, and capital outlay. So let's take a look at whether that would be approvable or not. We already know just by the wording in the planned action and service that they made changes during the year. So they hired 5 teachers and 2 APs, right? Then what was originally, those were key words. They didn't originally budget for those extra staff members. And then they added a bungalow. So they already reported it in the wrong column. So for the criteria in terms of determining whether we would approve it or not, they would get an X for all 3 criteria. We would not approve that. So Bonnie's going to lead you through the analysis section, and we'll try to get this computer to work.
Okay, the analysis section of the annual update. You'll recall last year this replaces the one box changes box. People called the magic box, and this was significantly expanded, and that I think is in response to the understanding that the analysis sort of where the rubber hits the road in terms of good planning. And that it's not only the most essential part of the plan, but it's often the weakest part, whether you're looking at school plans or district plans. So the purpose here was to slow it down and to put it into these 4 boxes. So you're looking at each piece in the analysis. And this is for each goal. So the instructions for the annual update, there's 4 boxes. The first box, and it says you need to describe the overall, first of all, implementation of the actions and services. Yay! It's so comforting to have Judy right there. Okay, so your first box is about implementation. Describe the overall implementation of the actions and services. And in addition to that, you're supposed to address relevant challenges and successes in that process. So make sure I hit the right button here. Okay, and here are the successor reviewer notes, which essentially say the same things. So you're looking at 3 things. Are they describing implementation in relation to the goal? In other words, how is implementation taking place to get us to that goal? Secondly, address challenges, and finally, successes. So let's take a look at a sample. This one is rather lengthy because it's a little bit longer section. So you maybe, I'm not sure how clear that is on your handout. So maybe I'll just kind of summarize it here, and you can follow along. They said this was the pilot year for the online reporting system, which will move us toward our goals of improving interventions and enrichment to meet students' academic and behavioral needs. The system provides timely information on multiple student indicators to allow timely intervention to close achievement gaps. Okay. The action was fully implemented this year, and based on usage level and feedback from users, it appears that school-level staff see this as a valuable resource and are refining how to use it to intervene with students to demonstrate academic and attendance problems or who are not on track for graduation. Our greatest challenge was implementation of the attendance support services. Difficulty in finding appropriate staff meant that services were not begun until mid-year. In addition, it was determined that the parent component did not effectively target our most at-risk students. So take a moment and look, did it meet those 3 criteria that it described implementation toward in relation to the goal, challenges, and successes? So just take a second and do that. Okay. So what do you think? Did their description address implementation in relation to achievement of the goal? Yeah, they made a real connection between how this was going to move them to the goal. Did they address challenges that they experienced? Yeah, they had some challenges with their parent piece wasn't in place, and they also had challenges with the attendance folks getting them on. And what about successes? Yeah, sort of. Okay, maybe they could have done a little bit more specifically what was there, but they might have addressed some successes. They were shy, okay? All right, so let's take a look at another one. Now this one is slightly shorter, so you can take a look at that and read it. Okay. Short doesn't necessarily mean bad now. Let's not prejudge, but... Okay. So, whoa. Well, that was easy. Did anybody disagree? Did they? No, we don't even know what the goals were. Were they getting toward their goals? No successes, no challenges. It's like, we did it. It's over. Okay. All right. The next section of the analysis is also about the actions and services, but in this section, they're asked to address the effectiveness of the actions and services, again, in relation to the goal. So the Success Manual tells us that we are supposed to verify that the description of overall effectiveness, that they provided a description in relation to the goal. So we'll take a look at one here. Again, here is a, here's the first one. And again, maybe this one, can you read it out there? I can't tell how small. How good are your eyes? I haven't sensed the age of the group. Maybe I'll go through it. The reporting, and again, they go back to their reporting system. And it resulted in identification of 52 students on track toward chronic absenteeism. Based on early identification, counseling services were implemented for 48 of those students who had two or fewer absences after receiving counseling intervention. 28 11th grade students were identified in the system as not being on track for graduation. All 28 participated in Saturday Credit Recovery Program. 26 are now on track to graduate with their class. 15 parents of kindergarten students and 9 parents of 9th grade students attended more than one workshop provided by the attendance specialist. This was far below the expected numbers, and attendance rates for kindergarten students remained the same as the prior year and declined for 9th grade students, okay? So did they provide a description of the overall effectiveness toward achievement of the goal? Yeah, you actually had some data, you could really see how that happened. So they passed. All right, this one, another sample based on an unnamed district that we know well. So read this one and see what you think about this. Did they meet the criteria? I guess your reaction was the same as ours, okay? Actually, this one lends itself to a choral reading. It's eloquent, isn't it? It's beautiful. Huh? This is how we educators talk. Did it say anything? No, okay. So that's an example of beautifully written, but not quite hitting the mark. All right. Okay, so the next section is, let me see, where are we here? We are on the material differences in estimated and their budgeted and their estimated actual expenditures. That's the third section. Okay? And the instructions ask us to explain the material differences between your budgeted and estimated actual expenditures, and they say that minor variances or dollar for dollar accounting isn't required. And the successa notes tell us that these material differences may vary by district size and expenditures planned. Okay? So last time there were questions about material differences, and we said, oh darn, that's in our section. And we successfully dodged the questions last time, but we figured we couldn't dodge them twice, okay? So we thought we needed to provide you with something else. So we went to see what might there be, because the term material is used in law frequently, but it's really an undefined term. So we wanted to see, was there anything, because our goal to be consistent, we need some criteria, so we're looking at this the same. So we went to see what could we find, and what we found was from the International International Financial Standards Board, and they gave us a little bit more helpful information that gave us some things to think about. It actually aligned with what our manual says, because it says materiality is defined as an entity-specific aspect of relevance. So that's kind of what our manual said, that it depends on the district. But it did give us some basis. It says based on the nature or magnitude or both of the items to which the information relates in the context of an individual entity's report. So in other words, they said, it's about making judgments, so this is going to be one of those judgment sections, on the significance or importance of the variety of issues that might be considered for inclusion, both according to their nature, which is what they relate to, and their magnitude, how big they are. So they're giving us two things to look at. How big is the change? How much money are we talking about? And what is the nature of it? What's it impacting? And again, in line with what our manual says, if something's material, it should be included in a report, and if it's not material, it doesn't need to be. But I think one of the key statements is this. I'm not sure if it got on your handout, but it says that if information is material, if omitting or misstating it could influence decisions that the users make. So that's a critical piece to keep in mind. Is it information that would impact decision making? Is this something stakeholders would need to know in order to make an informed decision? One of our consultants has a great way when districts ask her, is that material? She says, if you're asking me, it probably is. So that's good. But from our standpoint, that's a little more difficult. So what we'd like you to do is just to have a conversation, since this is something that is a judgment and we want our judgments to be in line. You have a couple handouts. One, they're purple handouts. One looks like this, and what it is a compilation of definitions of materiality from various financial organizations. And we'd like you to take a look at that, and as you look at it, if you might consider a couple things. One, just kind of review what the different definitions are, and is there any additional information or criteria that would help you in making this decision? And then secondly, do you see any commonalities as you go through it? And then at the same time, after you do that, we'd like you to do a second task, And that is, you have another purple sheet that has a little table talk, and it's also a little purple sheet. And what we've provided you are a couple scenarios, and because we don't have a lot of time, they're not really deep scenarios, but what we gave you are two scenarios that provide you with information on a district's budget, their budgeted amount for a particular goal, what their estimated actual expenditures are, so you can see the difference. And then when we talk about the nature of the change, we provided the reason for that change in funding to give you some additional information to make a decision on. And what we'd like you to do is take a look at it and say, is the change significant based on the magnitude of the change? Would you say this amount is significant? And then secondly, consider the nature of the change. And that whole idea of decision making. Is the nature of the change significant? And then would you consider this to be a material change? And then finally, where might this be reported? Because changes are reported, as Olivia pointed out, in other sections. Changes are reported by action, the amount of funding, budgeted and actual estimated, and your actions and your changes. So something might be reported there. Then you have your goal that's more of a summary, and some things might be reported there. So things can be reported, changes can be reported in various places. So just consider these two pretty simplistic sort of scenarios to give you some food for thought. And do you think they're material or not? Where might they be reported? Do you see them as changes in nature of the expenditure, changes in the amount of the expenditure? So take like just about two minutes maybe and have a discussion. We'll see what you come to. Olivia's going to come around, and if we could just ask, just get a couple tables just to share out their thoughts on those. Anyone willing to share if they thought these were material? What did they think about the changes? Any thoughts as you read that? And also your thoughts on reading that list of definitions, anything that came that would help you in making these decisions. Okay, so how many of you thought, in the interest of time, how many of you felt that scenario number one was a material change? Okay, that was, the scenario was they had $350,000 budgeted for the goal. They spent $325,000. It had to do with a placement on the salary schedule and providing services. So from a expenditure point of view, did this seem to be something that would push it over the line in terms of the amount? No, okay, so that piece you do. What about the nature? Did it change the nature of the action? No, they were doing the same thing, right? It cost a little more to do it. They were doing the same thing. That sounds like that felt kind of reasonable to do that. Okay, scenario two, they have $500,000 for the goal. They spent $215,000, and instead of hiring certificated staff for coaching, they hired paraprofessionals for playground supervision. The amount of money, red light, push you, yes. And does it change the nature of what they're doing? Yes. So would this impact decision making for stakeholders? Yeah, what happened here? Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so, yes. Oh, good. She's coming.
So these are both very black and white scenarios. So if we went to scenario one and they had a $350,000 planned expenditure and they only spent $175,000, but the reason is still the same. There's a materiality issue, but our job isn't to judge materiality, right? As long as they explain to their stakeholders what happened, then that's the end of it, right? They tried to implement, they explained why they had a shortfall. That's the end of it. So whether it's material or not doesn't really affect our decision as far as been my way of thinking.
It would impact the degree to which they have to address it in that section. If they said everything was the same.
But in this scenario, they
Yeah.
addressed it.
Yeah,
So,
they
so whether
addressed
this
it, yeah.
350 is 325 or 350 and 100, that doesn't matter to us as long as they've addressed
As
it.
long as they address it, yeah.
Okay.
That's,
Thank
they
you.
just need to address it. Okay. Okay, so, where are we? All right, we'll skip over, there's a couple examples there. One that passes muster, another one where when you look at it, actually, what they say are there's no significant difference, but a review of the information tells you something different than that. So that's those changes. So the last section is what used to be the changes section. Okay, last section is what used to be just that one box, and this is where they report their changes. And in this case, they need to describe any changes that are made to the goals, the outcomes, the metrics that are going to be made for the future year, and they have to also base this on analysis, including evaluation rubric data, and they need to identify where those changes can be found in the LCAP. So this one has a lot more criteria to look at. And we have, you'll see this goes on for several pages, and we won't look at all of it. We'll just get a flavor of it. And the manual tells us basically the same thing. So this one, their changes, they start out as a result of the analysis from the evaluation rubrics on high school suspension rate, showing 2 of our high schools as orange and 1 yellow. A new outcome has been added, specifically focused on decreasing high school suspension rates to provide additional focus on these schools, okay? So here they use the evaluation rubrics to make their decision. It's visible why they made that decision. They tell you where the change is specifically in the LCAP. And then the analysis of data on suspensions also led to addition of professional development on safe and civil schools and restorative justices at all high schools, and they tell you where the changes are reflected. So that just kind of gives you, as you can see, they did a lot on this one, which you would expect because this is where the full piece of the analysis is. So in this one, as you go through it, you'll see that yes, the section was completed. That's an easy one, okay? Secondly, the information, as you go through in this section, it's understandable why they made those changes. In other words, it makes sense. This is what was happening. This is what our data told us. This is why. That's usually the missing piece in analysis. So that's kind of what you're looking for. Does it hang together? And would someone, or does it just appear like somebody just made up this action for some reason you can't tell why? Next, well, let's go in order, is it based on the rubrics? And yes, they included information based on the evaluation rubrics. And are related changes to the goals, expected outcomes, actions reflected for the coming year. Yes, they were actually changing some of their outcomes to better measure some of these areas that weren't being measured. And then finally, did they indicate where you can find it in the LCAP? And they were very specific about how to do that. That's something you might want to consider as you're working with your districts. It came up with our districts in terms of usually the pages aren't numbered. How are they going to do that? So here they identified the goal and the action, but they may need some help with that. All right, so this one, on the other hand, told us the district will add music and art courses in middle school and summer school for elementary grades. So they did complete it, okay? They get a check. But that's about it, okay? It was not really understandable as to why you made this decision. No reference to the rubric or any sort of analysis. Nothing related to changes that are specific in the LCAP or where you can find it. They did say they're going to do something, but it wasn't very clear or specific, and nowhere that you could find it. Okay? Right. So that's in a nutshell the annual update. But again, it's an important section because it really takes you that bridge from what our data says to why we're doing what we're doing, and that why is all encapsulated in the annual update. So, thank you.